Welcome to the NAMI Mass webinar, State House 101. I'm Larry D'Angelo, the NAMI Mass Director of Affiliate Development. As I mentioned before, if you have any connect difficulties during the conference, you can call the 800 number that's up on the screen. We're recording this webinar, and we intend to post the webinar on the advocacy page of the namimass.org website. During the meeting, if you wish to ask a question, use the chat screen in the lower right-hand corner, and we'll pause periodically to answer your questions. Let me introduce the speakers. We have Lori Krinsky, who's the president of Central Middlesex affiliate, and we have Monica Luke, who is the chair of the NAMI Mass Advocacy Committee. So I'll turn it over to Monica first.
Correct. First, I want to check that people can see my slides. Can you guys see my slides? Is that a yes?
I can see your slides, and Nancy Excellent. Can see your slides, and Mary can see your slides, and Ralph can see. Yes, I would say
okay.
Yes.
That's enough. So as Larry said, I'm Monica Luke. I'm the chair of the Advocacy Committee of the NAMI Mass Board. This webinar is a reprise, if you will, of a presentation that Lori and I did at the convention last October, the Dream Big Act Now convention. A few things have changed, but not, this is pretty much the story of how the State House works, so not too much changes at a given time. The other thing I'll let you know is I can't see the chat when I'm presenting, so Larry and Lori are going to be the ones reading the questions, and we're going to have some question places where we stop for questions and read your questions in the chat. So please, ask your questions, and we'll ask them in real time at those pause moments. So there are a lot of different ways to advocate. Legislative advocacy is really just one way to be an advocate, but that's exactly what this presentation is focused on. So at another time, we might talk about some of the other ways that you can advocate, but today's topic is specifically legislative advocacy. So why would you do this? The biggest reason you would want to do this is your legislators really want to hear from you. Did you know that every contact that your legislator gets from an individual, they figure there's at least 300 constituents that person represents? And you guys might want to do a show of hands and tell us how many of you have actually met your legislator at some time, and whether or not you've. I see two. I'm getting little markers. We encourage you.
Icon on the top of your screen with the hand raised.
Yep, I'm seeing that there's 4 now. So that's terrific. I'm very excited about that. Hopefully you'll feel like you have some more tools that make you feel more comfortable connecting with your legislator after this webinar. We have our Advocacy Day for this year coming up on April 8th, and that's a great opportunity for you to come and talk to your legislators with all of us there in a supportive role. And the biggest reason why is you're the expert. Your story will help your legislators understand the mental health system. You're an expert in a very particular area that they know a little bit about. But when you come and tell your story, you bring to life the trials and tribulations of what it means to deal with the mental health system in Massachusetts. And advocacy draws attention to topics that your legislator may or may not have firsthand knowledge about. So as a convention, within this presentation, we use the red plus sign to indicate places where we may ask you to join us and advocate. And I've just started a new advocacy newsletter, and shortly there'll be an opportunity to sign up for that as a way to hear about when those opportunities arise to advocate. So we're going to spend some time talking about the legislative process in Massachusetts. Now that little guy up in the top corner, he is the guy from filing a bill on Capitol Hill. It's not radically different than the federal level. There's just a few things that are a little bit different. but the general process that we go through legislatively is very similar. So the first thing that happened is somebody has an idea for a bill. In Massachusetts, our legislative sessions are 2 years long. That is a little bit different. I don't know of any other state that does that. We start in January of an odd year through July of the following year. So we just had an election in the fall of 2018. We've just entered a new filing session in January of 2019, and that will go all the way through to July of 2020, when the legislature will adjourn in order to go run for office again. So the bill is filed or refiled in the House or the Senate by a sponsor. That's a legislator. That's somebody who is the main proponent of the bill. And any additional supporters are called co-sponsors. So you may have gotten an email in the last couple of weeks from us asking you to ask your legislator to co-sponsor some legislation. It's quite amazing. About 6,500 bills are filed each session. I heard this week that this session, 7,000 bills have been filed. The deadline for this session was the end of January, and the co-sponsorship deadline was February 1st in the House. And you can still sign on as co-sponsors, but the official deadline was February 1st. So what happens next? The next thing that happens is bills are assigned to a committee, and every bill that is assigned to a committee must have a public hearing. Your legislator has been assigned to one or more committees. And of course, for us, the committees we care the most about are the Joint Committee on Mental Health, Substance Use, and Recovery, and also the Healthcare Finance Committee. So we pay special attention to who the members are on those committees. Committee hearings can be really long. They may feature a lot of bills. And legislators, advocates, and other stakeholders have the opportunity to testify. So that testimony can be either oral or written. And that plus sign means that's an opportunity for you to show up and speak at or write testimony. We often supply email templates that help with that as well. After the hearing, the committee will vote on what action they want to take on the bill. A bill can be sent to study, which means better luck next time. It kind of goes into limbo. It can be an adverse, which means the bill is essentially dead, or favorable, in which case it will go on to the next step in this session. If a bill goes to study and nothing else happens to it in that legislative session, you can still file it again in the next session, but that's 2 years later. The next thing that happens is it goes to House Ways and Means. So any bill that impacts state finance, comes to this committee. If a bill has financial impact under healthcare, it might go to the Healthcare Finance Committee, which is sort of like the Ways and Means of healthcare. That committee may hold another hearing, and they may make amendments to the bill, they may combine it with other bills, or they might do nothing. So while the bill is in the House Ways and Means, it's another opportunity to contact legislators and encourage them to take action. Then that committee votes on how to support the bill and reports out. Same kind of decisions: study, adverse, or move on to the next step. Obviously, moving on to the next step is the one we want. If it passes outside of that, from the committee with a favorable report, the bill gets sent to the floor, and it may be debated and amended before the vote. So it's another opportunity to encourage your legislator to vote in the way that we would like them to, which is in favor of the bills we're supporting. If the bill is approved, it moves on to the next branch to essentially repeat steps 2, 3, and 4. So it will go to a committee hearing potentially, depending on whether it was a joint committee or not. It will go to the Senate Ways and Means, and then it will go to the Senate for a floor vote. So there's this sort of iterative process where the two chambers do the same activities. Now, often bills are filed at the same time in almost sometimes identical language by two legislators, one on the House side and one on the Senate side. And a lot of times that might streamline this process, but in reality, the Ways and Means and the votes have to take place in both chambers before the bill can move forward to the next step. And that next step is a conference committee. So what happens here is it's very common for both the House and the Senate to pass slightly different versions of the same legislation. That'll happen even if the original bills were filed with identical text because of that whole amendment process and changes that can happen both by the committee that hears it and the Ways and Means committees. So there can be changes in the bills. So the purpose of the conference committee is to agree on one single version. So 3 members from each branch are appointed by leadership to serve on the conference committee. That's another opportunity where your legislator might be involved in a process that we care about. And when a final version is reached, it's returned to both branches to vote on without any changes. If they insist sort of on making changes, it gets a little messy because now everyone hasn't agreed on the same bill. And the final step, excuse me, at this point is the governor. The governor gets to sign the bill. He has 10 days to sign it, to veto, or to return it with changes. So any bill that doesn't get all the way to the governor's desk can be refiled in the next session. As a practical matter, bills that get an adverse report out of committee tend not to be good candidates for refiling, at least not in their current state. But often people will rework the bill and refile it in another session. So that is the high-level process of the Massachusetts legislative process. One thing I'll point out is the ideas for bills don't all come from legislators. Sometimes they come from advocacy groups like NAMI, where we might actually draft the bill and get contact a legislator who might be interested in sponsoring it. The legislator will, in fact, take it into their office if they're going to sponsor it and probably change the language, but we can jumpstart the conversation by providing language, and that's a very common thing that advocacy organizations do. But also you, as an individual, can go to your legislator with an idea, and they may not often, but they will occasionally file it. And you might see a bill sometimes that says, filed by such such legislator, but on behalf of, and then a constituent's name. So there's lots of ways to get your ideas into this process. The budget is a very special bill. The budget goes through many of the same steps, except the budget is every year. So unlike our legislative process that in general bills take 2 years, the budget is an annual bill. And the budget is a really important bill because in the end, what we decide to pay for with our budget is what really happens. So when legislation gets passed, but there's no money included in it, it may or may not get enacted in reality if there's no money to support it. So the budget is a very big opportunity for us to do advocacy. There are opportunities to ask for co-sponsoring, support on specific amendments, voting on specific financial support for mental health programs and the DMH. And budgets, just like any other bill, are subject to amendments. They also have co-sponsors, and amendments are often late in the process. So how does the budget work? What happens is between September and January, agencies like the DMH will submit their spending plans. The administration will hold open hearings, and the governor proposes budget priorities, which is always called House 1, by January 4th. So we have the governor's proposed budget in hand already, and we know what he's proposing. Then what happens after the governor's budget comes out? A lot of the same things happen, things that we've already talked about. The budget will go to the House Ways and Means, and then the House debate, and then the House floor vote on the House budget. The Senate Ways and Means will do the same thing. They will have their Senate debate and their Senate budget, and then they will have their conference committee that works to get a single budget across both houses, and that gets voted on as the final budget. This generally takes between January and April, although I should say it's supposed to take between January and April. As a practical matter, it often spills into May. So the budget amendments tend to happen later in the cycle, closer to the April-May timeframe. They are advocacy opportunities, and very often we don't know about them until kind of the last minute. Same thing with the hearings. There are public hearings, and we can do testimony at those public hearings, just like any other hearing. So in summary, probably the biggest takeaway besides what the process is when do we advocate? Well, we advocate for bills, amendments, and budget asks that go through a multi-step process. And if you have gotten in the past requests to ask for co-sponsorship and then ask for a vote, and you're asked to contact your legislator many, many times, and you might have thought that meant that we weren't getting the job done. It's actually the opposite. Because every step of the way has an opportunity to advocate, if we're successful, there are additional opportunities to speak up and talk to your legislator. So we need to renew our advocacy each and every time, and success means asking again. So as I said, you may be asked by us to ask your legislator to co-sponsor something. If your legislator is a member of a committee that we really care about, you may hear from us more often. You'll hear about opportunities to submit oral or written testimony. You'll hear about when there's opportunities to sign up with support in other ways, when there's going to be votes, when we have budget asks, and when there are budget amendments. So there are lots of times where you might hear from us with opportunities to contact your legislator. And I think now is one of those pauses for questions. Hopefully there's some good ones.
I don't see any
No questions. You were so clear, Monica. You're amazing.
That's impossible. Wow.
Walter always asks a question. Walter, why didn't you ask a question?
Figure out how to get your pointer up. Oh, do bill numbers change? Yes. They do. There's a couple of different ways in which they change. So when they get filed, they get something called a docket number. So you'll see numbers like HD something and SD something. Those are temporary numbers. Those don't stay for very long. I was on the website today and I saw that some of the House bills are getting their final numbers now. So then they'll have an H number and an S number. So they will definitely change right after the filing period as they go to committee assignments. But they may also change during the rest of the legislative process. So during some of those amendment times, or last year they passed a criminal justice reform bill that was sort of like a combination of many other bills that had been pulled together. So that one got a new number. and contents were taken from a bunch of other bills. So there are a few different ways in which you might get different bill numbers. I see someone is typing.
We're waiting in anticipation, Walter, for you to finish typing there.
How to get that pointer, Lori? That's going to be the problem.
Oh,
I can point with my mouse.
Yeah, I can see your
though.
mouse. That's
Can you
fine.
see my mouse?
It's tiny, but
Okay, that'll.
might be helpful.
Well, maybe we should come back to Walter's
Wow.
question.
Yeah, that's either a really long, complicated question or he's not typing.
Oh,
Oh.
so Suzanne said,
Ah.
what's it like on Advocacy Day? Do we sign up?
I'm going to talk about all
Okay,
that stuff.
let me take Walter's question first, and then and that's what I was going to say. I'm going to turn it over to Lori. So Walter, the requests for advocacy have in the past come. We've been using the list of people who signed up for Advocacy Day last year, and I just launched a brand new advocacy newsletter, and that's where it's going to come out. We're very close to launching a new website for NAMI Mass, which will have a new sign up that allows you to sign up for news you can use, walk wisdom, and advocacy separately. In the meantime, if you'd like to be added to the advocacy newsletter and you didn't get my launch last week, just shoot me an email and I will add you. And Suzanne, to answer your question, I'm going to turn this over to Lori, and she is going to talk about Advocacy Day and building relationships with your.
Okay, thank you, Monica. So we've talked about the process a little bit, and now we're going to talk a little bit about the personal side of doing this, okay? We're going to think about ways to build a relationship with your legislator. Now, there's a kind of a long list there. Keep in mind that you don't have to do all of these things. One of your goals can be to eventually feel that you're serving as a resource for your legislator, some kind of reciprocal relationship. They get information from you, you try to help them out. You can target trying to do one of these things. Maybe over a 10-year period, you'll succeed in doing all of those things. But keep in mind that every little effort helps out with our goals. Meeting your legislators face-to-face is usually a pretty easy thing to do because the people who sign up for this job, they're people, okay? They want to say hello. They want to shake hands. They want to listen. They want to be helpful. So if you can pop into some of those events around town, Bedford Days, Acton Oktoberfest, all the festivals and activities and forums and town meetings and official town events, the politicians go to every single one of those. You can just stop over and say hello and introduce yourself. And maybe the second time you do that, you can pop in, I'd like to talk to you about mental health issues. And they'll say, sure. You can take the option of making an appointment to sit down with your legislator. And oftentimes they'll offer you time to spend with one of their aides, and that's perfectly fine. That's not a brush off. The aides are the gatekeepers, and that's a wonderful opportunity. When I first did that with my representative, the first thing she said when we sat down was to tell me the story of her family's mental health concerns. So statistics tell us you're very likely to run into somebody who's got a little bit of empathy for what you're going to bring up anyway. The last item on that list is testifying at the hearings, and Monica mentioned that. We can send in written testimony to the hearings, or we can appear in person. A few years ago, NAMI Mass sent out a call for people to come down and testify at a hearing about crisis intervention training for first responders. I really wanted to jump in and try to do more, so I signed up to do it. And I was getting excited. I drove down that morning and I started practicing in the car what I was going to say. And it's kind of a long drive into Boston for me, so by the end of the car ride, I was mostly talking myself out of it and saying things to myself like, you know, you've never done this before, you don't know what you're doing, your story's not that great, you know, your goal should be to sit down and shut up in the back of the room, just be a warm body count and listen. So I arrived at the State House, got lost. It's a big place with lots of twists and turns. I finally showed up at the hearing room. I was still early because I wanted to make sure I had time. There were very few people around there. A woman said to me, go in there, pointed to the empty room, and sign up. So I did that. Room filled up. The meeting was called to order with about 2 sentences, and then the next sentence was, all right, we will hear from our next constituent, and that's Lori Krinsky. So I didn't know what I was doing. I signed up to testify without understanding that. Had a moment of panic, went through my speech that I practiced in the car, and felt amazingly empowered. It was a great feeling to recognize that I got off the couch and I made the effort to participate in my democracy on a state level. Very few people take the time or effort to do that, and it made me feel like I really made a difference. So it's a big change, and it's a lot of fun. Next slide, please. Now, there's other things to think about in terms of building confidence, some internal challenges to becoming confident at doing advocacy. And here's a couple of things that people think about. The first one on there is, I don't want to bother anybody, okay? But you have to remember that these phone calls and emails, this is not telemarketing. This is the job and the goal of the people who work at the State House. They want to hear from you. They track everything you say. They take down your name, your address, your vote, your yes, your no, your opinions. They stack them all up. They count them all up. You're very powerful as a constituent. They want you to talk to them. You are the expert on mental health in their district. Your information and perspective is valuable to them. Now, the other 3 questions we have or concerns on the slide: I don't want to look stupid. I don't know where to focus or when. I don't even know what to say. All right, NAMI can help with that, and we're going to look at a couple of examples as we progress here through the presentation. Now, each time at the beginning of the legislative session, NAMI Mass employees get input from members, from other organizations, and from our legislative champions to come up with legislative priorities for the session. And you're encouraged to follow their lead for the items that they select, or you can go your own way. And we'll be we sent out a couple emails so far about a couple of bills that we've projected, but we'll talk about those in detail on Advocacy Day. And a great way to get started on being a good advocate is join in with your friends on Advocacy Day down at the State House. As Monica said, this is going to be on Monday, April 8th this year. We all meet in the Great Hall of Flags. There's a flag for every city in the whole Commonwealth in the room. It's a kind of an impressive space to be in. We review our legislative priorities, and we get motivated and prepare for prearranged 15-minute group meetings with the legislators. Now you can see on our agenda here that we have a speaker program. Those are motivational speakers. We have some NAMI members who will talk, some guests, legislative champions will step up. And then we prepare for our advocacy. There's 2 parts of that. One is a folder that we pass out that has scripts, NAMI brochures, and legislative fact sheets about each of the bills. And we're going to take a look at a legislative fact sheet momentarily. And then secondly, we spend some time for each person to write up and practice and role play a 1-minute version of their mental health story that they plan to share with the legislators. We break for lunch, and after that we split up to go to the meetings. All the people from Senator ABC's office will go meet outside that person's office. They'll take a moment within their group to select somebody who's going to be their spokesperson. Once everyone's inside the meeting room, the first thing is to go around the room, and each person will share their mental health 1-minute story. And then the spokesperson will review the legislative fact sheets. Now, you do have to sign up for Advocacy Day. There will be plenty of outreach from NAMI Mass on convincing you to do that. And that's because we want to, make the appointment on your behalf and get you a free lunch. Next slide, please.
I just want to add one quick thing before we switch, which is if you to get a free lunch, you have to register for Advocacy Day. And also, by registering for Advocacy Day, we can look up who your representative and your senator are so that we can make those appointments for you.
Okay, so here's a quick look at the legislative fact sheet that I mentioned. And each one, there will be one for each bill that we're rallying for, okay? Your goal here is not to memorize this, and you're certainly not supposed to sit and read that whole thing to the legislator in a 15-minute meeting. This offers a summary of the information that the legislators need to track the bill or to learn more about it, all right? And this is a leave-behind document. You simply summarize it and leave it for them to reference later on. Next slide, please. And then we talked about sharing your story. Now, Advocacy Day is one time to share your story, and at Advocacy Day we have to keep it pretty short, but there may be other times if you make an appointment with your legislator or other scenarios where you have time to discuss what's going on with you and your family, and it's a good idea to practice a little bit ahead of time. You have to keep in mind that your personal experience gains value each and every time you share it. It offers education and insight to those who are listening. At Advocacy Day, we like to keep it short and sweet. The last 5 years might have stunk, but we need to get that into a small package for delivery on that day. And we want to make sure that emotion moves but not overwhelms everyone. And again, as it says down at the bottom here, you don't have to have all the answers. You just have to have a clear ask and a clear request and a story to tell. Next slide, please. All right, as we move off of Advocacy Day, as the legislative session continues, you'll hear from NAMI Mass, and they'll send out action alert requests, all right? And this answers the concern about where and when to focus. So you have the option to follow NAMI Mass's lead and respond to some requests. So the example that we have up here right now is a large outreach to everyone, okay? This was a peer-to-peer earmark within the budget, and we asked all the NAMI members to contact all their legislators to see if we could get their attention on this issue. Advocacy can also be effective in much smaller targeted doses. Last year there was an amendment that was part of that criminal justice bill that Monica mentioned, and it had gone into conference committee, so there was a limited number of legislators still reviewing it. The head of that committee was Senator Bruce Tarr. NAMI made the effort to identify NAMI members within his legislative district and ask them to approach Bruce Tarr and rally him to keep that amendment within the bill. And that effort did work. A really targeted small thing can make a difference, and the amendment was part of the big bill. Also, as Monica mentioned, we can also have a more targeted approach sometimes to somebody who has bigger influence. So the Senate President, Karen Spilkas from Framingham, we might be asking you a little bit more often to send a note to her attention. And all of these different ways around it truly speak to the power of being a constituent. That's who they want to listen to. That's whose vote they still want to earn every couple of years. So you have to remember that your views as a constituent are very important and powerful. Next slide, please. So when you get a request from NAMI Mass to do an advocacy effort, we're not going to leave you hanging. We're going to help you with that question of, I don't know what to say. What do I say? So we'll always come with a suggested email script and a suggested phone call script. And you can go with that. You can change it. As you get more touch points with your legislator, you'll be able to say, hey, I shook your hand at Bedford Day. I'm following up on my promise to keep you informed about mental health concerns. My big picture story of touch points goes back to that testimony that I did down at the State House for the CIT bill. My senator was sitting right there. He saw me. A couple months later, he had a forum in my community about gun violence and the red flag laws. I stood up at that meeting and brought up the crisis intervention training for police. My town's chief of police stood up and said, yay, I love that. That's very helpful. And then my senator stood up and said, yes, all we need to do is get it more funding. And everybody clapped. Excellent. So a couple months later after that, when a CIT bill came up, I reminded my senator of that situation where he got a round of applause and asked him to follow up on it. Okay? And that's a great way to, just takes a couple touch points to really make a difference on an item. The last point on this slide is kind of repeats what Monica said a little bit, is that if you receive a second or third email about the same bill, we don't want you to roll your eyes and be like, what are they doing? I just did this. You should be celebrating because that's progress. That means that things have continued. The bill is still alive. We're getting there. All right, next slide, please. I think that's our question slide, so we're open to concerns?
So Kimberly is asking about the link for Advocacy Day.
I don't think we have that
It's
yet.
not ready yet.
I actually was asking about that in an email on Monday. So it will be coming soon, and the sign up for Advocacy Day will definitely be in news you can use. But we won't assume that if you sign up for Advocacy Day that you want the advocacy newsletter. That will be a separate sign up.
All right, are we ready to move on? Okay.
I think so.
All right, so we're going to think about another tool you can use to become a more informed and confident advocate. And we're going to spend a little time going through the Massachusetts State House website. Next slide, please. And this is the opening page that you'll see when you go there. We're going to delve in through a couple of the tabs and walk your way through some things. The first tab will be the Legislators tab. If you see the white line going across there at the sort of at the top there, Legislators is in the middle. If we click on that, click. Next slide. Then we'll end up in a place. It does open up to a place where you can look up your legislator. If you don't know who they are, you enter your address and it'll give you the contact information very quickly. It's a good system. Here is my senator. His name is James Eldridge. And you can see there on the left side of the slide that we have the offices that he keeps up. There's always one in the district, and that might be the easiest place for you to set up an appointment to come and see him. If you look to the bottom left, you'll see the list of committees that he is on. And down near the middle there, you'll see that Joint Committee on Mental Health, Substance Use, and Recovery. He was on that committee during the last session. Unfortunately, he's changed to some other things this time, but as Monica mentioned, that's one of our favorites. On the right side, if you click on the Bills tab, then you'll see a list of the bills that he sponsored or co-sponsored. And it's sometimes a good idea to check this before you want to communicate with the office, because you may be starting to type, please co-sponsor this bill, and if you would have checked, he already did it. So you didn't have to nag him to do something. You had to send him a thank you note and say, great, thank you. This is dear to my heart. I appreciate your support there. All right, next slide, please. If we click on the Bills and Laws tab, far left side, in the dark blue box, we'll come to a page where you can enter the number of a bill down at the white box at the bottom. So what we're going to pretend we're doing here is entering the bill that was the fact sheet that we looked at previously. So that was S.1090, Senate 1090. And if we do that, we will, next slide please, magically appear at the new bill. Yay. That was entitled An Act to Establish a Center of Excellence in Community Policing and Behavioral Health. In the small box where it says View Text, you can click on that and you can read the bill. Sometimes they're pages long, sometimes they're a lot shorter. It's kind of interesting how they vary. At the bottom of the page, you see kind of a calendar of what's been going on with the bill. On 1/23 of 2017, you'll see it was referred to the Committee on Mental Health, Substance Use, and Recovery. Who do we know on that committee? That's my friend Jamie Eldridge. You know to bother him about that. On 7/12, there was a hearing scheduled for this bill. So NAMI members sent in written testimony and or showed up to speak at that effort. And then down on the bottom, we answer the question about, do the bill numbers change? Yep, on 4/19, it changed to S2452, and they do change all the time. Excuse me. And then if we click again and pretend click on the Petitioners tab, we move up a little bit, we end up on this other section of the bills page. And that's the list of the petitioners or co-sponsors, the other legislators, who have decided that they want to back this bill. All right, we go down to the bottom, and there we see James Eldridge again. He wasn't there at the start. A few years before this came up, he shook his head at me when I brought it up. So I'm going to feel like we're going to go ahead and take some credit here for NAMI Advocacy Day. We met with his staff during Advocacy Day. multiple individuals, not just myself, followed up with him. And eventually this bill was passed as an amendment onto the part of the opiate treatment bill. It's currently waiting for funding, and we're going to keep at it. But we're going to count that as a pretty good success so far. If we switch over to the next slide, we'll learn another thing that you can do with the Mass Legislative website, and you can follow a committee. And here's our favorite Joint Committee on Mental Health, Substance Use, and Recovery. On the left side, you see the members in the group. And on the right side, you can take a look at the hearings that are scheduled for the variety of bills. And one thing to note about this section is the hearings are often posted with very little notice. So if you get a advocacy request from NAMI Mass that says, please give this to us, or please respond and contact your legislators within 3 days before the hearing comes up, that's them responding to this process, to this posting process. It's not necessarily NAMI Mass being 3 weeks out on something. They're responding as quickly as they can to a program that doesn't plan ahead as much as some of us would like. Okay, the next slide, please. Another option you can do, and last but not least, because it comes up every year, is you can follow the budget on the legislative website. There's a timeline there to track how things progress as we go along. And next slide, please. Monica?
So I'm going to close us out with a pep talk, if you will. It is a long road, and Lori did describe sort of some of the different ways in which it takes a while to build up a relationship that creates a big difference. That's not to say that every time you show up doesn't make a difference, because like I said, every time you speak to them, they know that you represent 300 other people in their district. But it does take time and effort, and we want to acknowledge that it is a long road, and it takes a lot of your energy, and we appreciate that, but it really is worth it. As you can tell from Lori's stories, she's proud of the results that she's achieved by her efforts, and you will be too. So every touch, as they say, is an opportunity. It's an opportunity to educate your legislators, tell them what it's like if they don't pass this legislation, explain to them what is going on in terms of your experience with the mental health system. You can educate legislators, and educating their staff is sometimes even more important. Lori touched on it a little bit, but not only are they the gatekeepers, sometimes they're the deciders. The legislators are often extremely busy with public functions where they have to be at a ribbon cutting or breakfast or give a speech somewhere. So it is really the legislative aide that often is the person that decides what goes in front of the legislator and asks them, do they want to take an action? It takes a lot of persistence to get our issues to the top of the agenda. On average, in Massachusetts, it takes 8 years or 4 legislative cycles to pass something. And that's even true for things that are not controversial. So it is an effort that takes patience. And I encourage people not to become frustrated. And it's all the more reason that when you get another notification of it's time to ask again, to be rejoicing, because it means we're a lot closer to the end of that 8 years than the beginning. And I believe that's the end of our presentation. Other than questions, I do want to do this acknowledgement before we close out, which is a lot of the materials in this presentation were crafted from materials that Kate Guinness from the Children's Mental Health Campaign General has shared with me, and I reworked them for us, but she saved us a ton of time in describing the legislative process in particular. And here's how to contact us. So I'll leave that up while we deal with the last rounds of questions. No more questions. Oh, people are typing. You're welcome. You're very welcome. And for anyone who that would be interested in this will be up on the website as well as The slides are actually already up on the website from the committee.
So Monica, they'll be on the advocacy page, right?
Right, and on the new website too, which is coming soon. People are typing. I'm just going to give it a second.
So it spreads over 2 years is the point, right? About the legislative session?
Yeah, so Thomas's question is the legislative session looks more like 1.5 years rather than 2. Yes and no. So as a practical matter, they do tend to adjourn by the end of July, but in reality, they can keep going right up until November, and in some cases they do. They will do sort of like cleanup legislation, if you will. Not quite as proactively as some other states. I don't know if people were aware of like the effort, some of the things that happened in Wisconsin after the election, where they were passing legislation to gut the governor's powers because the legislature was still Republican and a Democrat had been elected governor. We don't allow that here, but we do allow cleanup legislation, if you will. So things that might not have been quite finished, they can have votes, and they do have some votes.
So Sheila has a question about the information that you shared in the advocacy.
Yeah, I see that. There won't be information in the packet about your specific legislator. What will be in the packet is the legislative fact sheets, information about NAMI, things for you to give to the legislator. You can look up your legislator and learn the stuff that you see on the website before you go there. If somebody shows up and they don't know who their legislator is, we have people there to look them up for them as well. So, but we won't be providing individual information on each legislator.
So the other question there is, does this process influence or affect agency policy? So one of our asks every year, and it will be one of our asks this year, is for money in the DMH budget. So to the degree that the DMH can do things, the money is how they get to do things. So it does influence activities. I don't know that it would influence particular policies, except where some of those budget line items might be earmarked. So for example, this year we're going to be supporting, the governor has in his budget right now $2 million to support housing for people with mental health conditions. $1 million of that is in the DMH budget, and $1 million of that is in the DHCD budget, which is the Department of Housing something development, community development, something. So sometimes they're specific. So yes, this is a policy of housing for people with mental health conditions, and sometimes it doesn't. Sometimes it's for not earmarked specifically to an agency. Some legislation is about requiring certain things of different agencies. So, for example, one bill we have as a priority this year, legislation to transfer Bridgewater State Hospital from the control of the DOC, Department of Corrections, to the DMH. So that would influence the agency's actions if that were to go through. So it's kind of mix and match. As I mentioned at the top of the hour, there are many other kinds of advocacy. That tonight's topic was legislative advocacy. So affecting particular agency policies might require other types of advocacy. And if you had something particular in mind, feel free to shoot me an email and we can talk about it. Is that part of the move to Housing First? Housing First, I believe, and I'm not an expert on this, is a sort of separate initiative that is under the DHCD. That's about people who are homeless already, who may or may not have a mental health condition. Whereas the money for the DMH is specifically for people with a mental health condition. Go for Mass Health, like specific. Okay. Can we advocate for specific health issues like coverage? Yes. Um, we are not specifically advocating this year for mass health, but we are specifically advocating, for example, that ESP program, which currently is only covered by mass health, there is legislation that we are leading on to require that commercial insurers cover it. So it depends on what the issue is and whether there's enough opportunity. So uh, we did an activity at the convention to understand from people what the concerns are of our members in NAMI Mass, and we're encouraging affiliates to run a similar Dream Big Together activity so that we're aware of what the big concerns are from our members, and that's actually how come housing is so high on our list this term. But advocacy is sort of an interesting intersection of the things that we believe are important and the things where there's opportunity to do something. So part of why housing also got to the top of the list is several other advocacy organizations